and so I will hand over to Talicia, I believe.
Yes, Talicia and Alexis are going to sort of lead you through the slides and the wider early detection CRUK vision. I just wanted to say a quick hi. So I'm David Crosby, as Kate said. I'm the head of early detection and prevention research at CRUK. As you may be aware, CRUK have been on a bit of a journey with early detection research over the last 5 years or so, starting with, I suppose, good intentions and high hopes, but perhaps not a great deal of visible activity 5 or 6 years ago, through to now what we have is quite a thriving base of a burgeoning early detection community across the UK, and a strategy to further grow that community and further invest in this crucial challenge for CRUK strategy, but for human health. We're really excited that that you guys have taken the time and energy to put this workshop together, and that you've chosen to prioritize cancer detection, but also to take notice of the roadmap that we published last year and its aspirations for a more integrated and ambitious vision for what we can really do. We over the last few years have spent a lot of time engaging with various research communities to try and get a sense of where we should really be focusing our efforts and what we should be targeting. And often we're confronted with, well, not unreasonable negativity in this space. It's been seen as an immense challenge. It's been seen perhaps in some cases as pie in the sky, kind of fanciful, like, sure, of course it would be nice to do early detection, but it's just too hard. And I think that if we're going to achieve anything, we must be ambitious. And so that was the ethos behind the roadmap, and we'll hear more about that in the talks to come. But really, if I was going to kind of leave you with a couple of impressions from my opening salvo, it's we want to reach further, we want to be ambitious, and that we cannot get anywhere if we don't back that ambition with an integrated, multidisciplinary approach that really thinks through the journey from discovery science, tech innovation, all the way through to genuine clinical implementation. So with that, I'll hand you over to Talicia, who's going to talk you through some of our strategy.
Great, thanks Dave, and thank you for inviting us here today to talk to you guys. As Dave mentioned, we're really happy that you guys are interested in this area and want to hear more. So my name's Talicia and I'm an Early Detection and Diagnosis Research Programme Manager, and alongside my colleague Alexis, who's also a Research Programme Manager for Early Detection and Diagnosis, we're going to be talking to you about some of Cancer Research UK's ongoing activities in early detection and diagnosis, and also speaking to you about our funding streams. So just by way of introduction, and I'm sure that you guys don't need this, but Cancer Research UK is the largest funder of cancer research in Europe, and we fund just under 50% of cancer research activity in the UK, and we're almost exclusively funded through public donations. So we spend that money on research, and we're going to be talking about that today, but we also spend it on providing information and our advocacy activities, and also public policy work. So Cancer Research UK has a vision to bring forward the day when all cancers are cured. So currently around 50% of people will survive their cancer, and Cancer Research UK is really working to drive forward progress so that we can see 3/4 of people survive their disease. So I just wanted to introduce you to sort of our funding portfolio. Cancer Research UK funds research into all cancer types, including those that are low incidence. And that's everything from biology through to late phase clinical studies. And in 2016-17, we spent around 386 million on research, and 112 million went towards research that underpins all types of cancer. And then you can see the breakdown by other cancer types in those bubbles. One thing to mention is that we have 4 cancers which we've identified are cancers of unmet need. So that's lung, brain, pancreatic and esophageal. And the reason why these cancers have been prioritised is because in the past decade, the survival rates for these cancers hasn't improved very much. So Cancer Research UK is obviously keen to improve the quality and quantity of research that we're funding in those cancer areas. So what does that mean for a funding committee? That means that if you had a certain amount of budget left to fund one application, you had 2 applications that were of equal merit, and one of them was looking at a cancer of unmet need and the other application was looking at a different cancer type, then the one addressing the cancer of unmet need would be prioritised. So just to talk a bit about the depth and breadth of our research spend. So around 50% of our research is within the basic arena, so around basic discovery. About a third is in the translational area. So that's really working out how we can move those basic discoveries through into the clinic and to patient impact. And about 21% is on our clinical research. And you can see in the pie chart, so we have around 42% of the portfolio on biology, 32% looking at new and innovative treatments, and we've got 15% coming to early detection and diagnosis and prognosis, which is important for our conversation today. So to talk about early detection and diagnosis research, which is obviously the area of interest for all of us, it's worth noting that previously we had a sort of distinction between early detection research and early diagnosis research, and our committee looked after the early detection research, and the early diagnosis research went to a separate committee called EDAG. But now we realised that was quite confusing to the community and it makes sense for it all to be together. So now our committee encompasses both. So what do we mean by that? So early detection research is that research which seeks to enable the detection of cancer or precancerous states at the earliest possible time point at which an intervention might be made. And that's everything from discovery research through to clinical research. But we also cover early diagnosis research, which is the research which seeks to understand the role of patients and healthcare professionals and healthcare providers, and seeks to develop interventions in a population or clinical context. So that encompasses population research, behavioural studies, risk stratification, and policy relevant research. And Alexis is going to go into a bit more detail on the remit in a later slide. So why is early detection important? And I'm sure I don't need to tell you all this, but as I mentioned, Cancer Research UK has the ambition of having 3/4 of people survive their cancer in the next 20 years. And we know that early detection is going to be key to that. Why? We know that most therapies are more effective when given at earlier stages. We know that survival rates for many cancers improve dramatically when detected earlier. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see an example there for bowel cancer. You can see that the survival rate for patients that are diagnosed at stage 1 are significantly higher than patients that are diagnosed at stage 4. So we know we need to understand the biology of early and precancerous conditions, which will underpin early detection. And we need to validate and implement early detection strategies into clinical practice. So if it's so important, why haven't we made much progress? And really, that's because the early detection field has been subject to a range of historical challenges which have hindered progress. So firstly, it's incredibly complex, and I think Dave sort of hinted at this in his opening speech, in that we're often looking at a picture where there are millions of factors at play. You know, you've got host and tumor genetics, you've got circulating proteins, you've got the metabolome, the microenvironment, population level risk factors. And so that has really been a challenge for the scientific community. Also, we're often looking for markers that are present at vanishingly low levels, and that's set a really high bar that the technology has had to meet. And, previously that hasn't been possible. There's also fragmented expertise. So in order to develop and deliver effective early detection and diagnosis, you need multiple scientific disciplines and multiple different sectors to come together and work collaboratively. And previously, we've seen that these disciplines and sectors have been working in silos. There's also the issue that the health economic benefits of implemented early detection and diagnosis haven't been conclusively demonstrated. And that has meant that early detection and diagnosis has been under prioritized by our healthcare system and by various other institutions. And in contrast to therapeutics, there isn't a clear regulatory and adoption pathway for new early detection and diagnosis approaches and technologies. And because of all of these factors, there's historically been poor industry engagement. And that's also because there's a need for long and expensive studies which have a readout in mortality. And that's, been a challenge for industry and something that has de-incentivized them from getting involved. And so there's also been a lack of scale. So we know that there's been some excellent pockets of research activity in this area, but this is a colossal challenge that needs to be tackled at scale. So at Cancer Research UK, we're trying to employ a multifaceted approach to tackle all of those challenges and to really drive forward progress in early detection and diagnosis. So one way that we're doing that is by community building and networking. So Alexis will talk a little bit later about our Early Detection of Cancer conference. I'm going to talk to you about our Early Detection and Diagnosis roadmap, and we'll also touch on our SAMPIT workshops. We also fund research, so we have our funding committee, and there's also the Cancer Grand Challenges programme, which is seeking to fund really ambitious and international research programs tackling the biggest challenges in cancer. And there has been a Cancer Grand Challenge. There is a Cancer Grand Challenge program focused on early detection. We're also investing in capabilities and infrastructure. So we have our International Alliance for Cancer Early Detection, which is a really exciting partnership between ourselves, the University of Manchester, University College London, the University of Cambridge, the Canary Centre at Stanford, and the Night Cancer Institute at OHSU. And that's really aimed at tackling the biggest challenges in early detection. We are also keen to collaborate with industry, and I'll talk to you a bit later about our networking events, which is one way we're hoping to do that. And we're always looking out for opportunities to leverage other infrastructure to drive forward early detection and diagnosis research. So most notably right now is Our Future Health, which is formerly known as ADD. So we're continuing to work with them to explore opportunities. So in order to unite the fragmented efforts in early detection and diagnosis and to map out a pathway for the future of early detection and diagnosis of cancer in the UK, we embarked on an extensive consultation exercise to develop our early detection and diagnosis of cancer roadmap. So what is it? It's a shared vision for a future where the early detection and diagnosis of all cancers is a routine reality. And what it does is it highlights the current challenges which are impeding progress, and it provides tangible recommendations for the whole ecosystem to come together and work on, which will enable us to overcome those challenges and to reach that shared vision. So it was really important when developing the roadmap is to collate multiple different perspectives. So as I mentioned, this was an extensive consultation exercise, and the first step of that consultation was convening a roadmap steering committee. So this was a group of the key movers and shakers in the field, and it was chaired by Professor Chris Whitty. So the roadmap steering committee helped to set the framework for the roadmap, and then we took that framework to a multi-day workshop in which over 80 representatives from different sectors participated. So we were bringing in people from academia, industry, from healthcare, from NHS regulators, investors, patients, all to inform that vision for the future and to prioritise those recommendations. We also had input from various Cancer Research UK colleagues, so this was definitely a joint project from the research department and also the policy department, and we had input from various other teams. And obviously patients and public sit at the heart of all of the recommendations in the roadmap. So they were consulted in various ways via our Cancer Insights panel. We had patient representatives attend the workshop, and we also have impact stories from some patient representatives in the roadmap itself. So the recommendations in the roadmap are divided into 4 different themes. So the first theme is all around understanding risk and prognosis. So how can we identify those who are most at risk of developing cancer? So how do we know who to screen and who to apply early detection and diagnosis tests to? And how can we know which early and precancerous lesions will develop into lethal and consequential disease? So about resolving that prognosis issue. The second theme is all around biomedical data science and systems. That was looking at how can we unlock NHS data for early detection and diagnosis research? Can we do things like develop AI risk stratification tools? And can we ultimately work towards an AI data-driven model for each individual that can inform proactive early detection and diagnosis? The third theme is all around sort of resolving those blockers and a lack of incentives to developing early detection, developing and commercializing early detection and diagnosis approaches and technologies. So that's things like, can we build that health economic model for early detection and diagnosis? Can we support real world validation and evaluation of emerging early detection and diagnosis approaches? And how can we sort of embed in entrepreneurialism into early detection and diagnosis? And the fourth theme is all around healthcare system innovation and adoption. So that looks at how we can build on the current strengths of our healthcare system and evolve the infrastructure to support the implementation and adoption of early detection and diagnosis approaches. So within the roadmap, we also have 6 policy recommendations, and those really are a direct call to action for the UK government and the government of the devolved nations to take action to support the early detection and diagnosis agenda. And by delivering on these recommendations, the government will support the research recommendations that I just discussed. So I won't go into all of these in detail, but it's things like, can we really address that market failure in early detection and diagnosis? Can we appropriately value and adopt early detection and diagnosis technologies into healthcare? How can we really make that patient data available for early detection and diagnosis research, and to really expand that data to make it useful for that research, but also maintain public trust? And other things like, can we explore a new model for health check centres for the asymptomatic public? So there's various ways that you can engage with the roadmap at the moment. So I just want to encourage anyone who hasn't done this already, but to head to cruk.org/EDD roadmap and download your own copy of the roadmap. You can also read a sort of digestible snapshot of the roadmap in the Lancet Oncology, which is published as a comment article, and I can share that with you, a link to that later. And you can also watch our roadmap research webinar. So in December of last year, we held our first webinar for the research community, which was really aimed at how we can embark on collaborative research in line with the roadmap recommendations. And we had some great speakers. So we had Professor Peter Johnson, which of course many of you will know is the NHS England National Clinical Director for Cancer. We also had Susan Galbraith, who's the Senior Vice President for Early Oncology at AstraZeneca. So it's really worth a watch. And if you head to that, to our roadmap webpage, there's a link to watch that webinar. So before I hand over to Alexis, I just wanted to touch on some of our academia industry networking events. So as I noted on our one of our earlier slides, we're really keen to encourage industry engagement in early detection and diagnosis. And we're particularly keen to facilitate the knowledge exchange between academia and industry, and to really spark some hopefully collaborative relationships, which will encourage people to submit funding applications to us that are coming up with some really innovative ideas. So in line with this, we're hosting some virtual academic industry meetups in March, so this month, and next month as well. So these are tailored to specific areas of early detection and diagnosis research. So we've got one coming up on AI imaging and digital pathology. We've got another one on risk prediction and stratification, and another on omics and liquid biopsy. So the style of those events will be that collaborators will pitch rapid fire style. So they've got 90 seconds to talk about their research interests and their collaboration needs. And then we'll be moving into some speed networking. And obviously Cancer Research UK will be on hand to help any further collaborations. So do let me know if that's something that you're interested in. We'll be looking to run more of these events further down the line. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Alexis.
Thanks, Talicia. So hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alexis Webb, and I'm going to take over and talk about a few more of our different initiatives that I look after, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the revamped funding committee and take some questions from you, I hope, at the end. So I wanted to start with talking about our early detection sandpit or innovation workshops. These have been running since summer of 2018, and we've run actually a total of 5 now. So the reports of the first 4 have all been published, and they're available on our website, and I will put that link into the chat in a moment to share with you. But what is really exciting about the sandpit workshops is, as Talicia mentioned, we are really interested in the team in capacity building in early detection, and part of that comes from collaborations and building new multidisciplinary collaborations. So we've been really lucky to partner with a couple of the research councils, including the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, to get engineers, technologists, computer scientists, people who might have a really interesting and novel approach but have never worked in cancer before, interested in the challenges of early detection. And we bring those people together with cancer biologists and clinicians and other people that are working in the cancer space who are also interested in early detection in these 3-day, typically residential workshops, but we had our first virtual one back in December last year. And what happens over the course of this workshop, participants scope out the key challenges and where the opportunities are potentially for novel and innovative ideas. And this model we found is a great way for us to get new interdisciplinary teams together, but also have them come up with something that might be a bit more high risk than funding proposals that would come to our standard committee. So we've seen a lot of really interesting seeds of ideas that have been supported through these workshops, and we're starting to see the fruits of those seeds. So we've had a team from the first sandpit workshop has now gone on to get follow-on funding through an early detection and diagnosis committee project award. So really it's our goal to get people interested in this area, to start working together and producing new ideas, and hopefully building that idea into something more. And so we've had a lot of really interesting topics, everything from liquid biopsies to digital pathology. And then I think, Talicia, can you advance the slide for me? Thanks. Our last workshop, as I mentioned, which was fully virtual, was around early detection approaches for pancreatic cancer. So it was the first cancer-specific workshop that we've run, but it was also very successful, and we were lucky to run that with Pancreatic Cancer UK, who really brought in that pancreatic-focused community to the workshop. Plans for the next sandpit are underway. We're hoping to have another one in this financial year, but it hasn't been announced yet. And if you would like to know more, or at least be aware in the know when it does open, you can subscribe to our newsletter, which I'll have a bit of a blurb about at the end. Can I have the next slide, please? The other thing I wanted to mention in terms of big upcoming events is our annual Early Detection of Cancer conference that we have in partnership with the Knight Cancer Institute at OHSU and the Canary Center at Stanford. This conference is really moving from strength to strength. We're going into our 6th year this year. Again, it will be virtual, and given the likely constraints that will still remain on international travel in the coming probably 6 months to a year, but we're hoping that 2022 we will be back in the US in Portland. So this conference, we've selected our program committee, and they are busy finalizing topics as we speak, and we're hoping to announce the full program and open registration towards the end of this month, or potentially right after the Easter holidays. If you would like to be notified when that opens up, there's a short link on this slide. And again, I'll put it in the chat. So you can just go and add your information, and you'll be contacted as soon as registration is open. Can I have the next slide, please? Great. So now probably what most of you are here to hear about, our Early Detection and Diagnosis Committee. So as Talicia mentioned earlier, we have combined kind of some existing pockets that span the early detection and diagnosis spectrum. So our original committee, the Early Diagnosis Advisory Group, and also the former Early Diagnosis Panel that used to sit under the Population Research Committee, have all come together under one unified remit, which will hopefully be a much clearer destination for you as the research community to submit your applications. So the blue bubbles have highlighted the more detection-focused aspects of the remit that you might have been familiar before if you had submitted to our committee. So this is around markers, high-risk groups, preclinical models, technology and computation and data-driven approaches, and then non-confirmatory, so early stage ED&D trials of technologies and approaches. And then we've expanded obviously into the pink realm at the bottom. So very much interested in bringing in more work around health systems research, clinician and patient behavioral research, or maybe in this case, it would be public behavior, pre-detection and diagnosis. And then obviously evaluating the interventions in terms of policy relevant research, and looking at the health economics of early detection approaches. So all of these, again, would be part of the remit of our committee, and we would also be keen to see any proposal that spans multiple aspects of this very broad remit. Next slide, please, thanks. So in terms of the support that we offer, we have 3 levels of support for the early detection funding. The first is the project award, which is probably the most traditional award that you would be familiar with. These are typically 3 to 4 year awards and up to £500,000. These will be quite discrete and focused pieces of work that tend to be hypothesis driven and experimental plans, kind of all addressing a single question or hypothesis. Our programmatic awards are the larger scale awards. So these tend to be multi-center, 5-year awards, and up to £2.5 million over the course of the 5 years. These are, as I said, again, large scale, multi-center, multiple work packages that tend to sit under a broader early detection theme. And then finally, our primer awards, which is something that's been unique to our committee, is an award level that's really for pilot stage exploration. So these are 1-year 100K awards. They are designed to get people that may have not been in the early detection field before, get them in the door and either help them set up new collaborations, generate pilot data, or even support postdocs. So potentially someone in one of your labs who's interested in leading their own project, postdocs can apply for this award with their supervisor's permission and then be able to deliver a piece of work as part of their ongoing career development. And you can see across the bottom the average success rates up through our most current funding round, which the meeting was in November of 2020. One more thing to add, sorry, Talicia, just to say that our programmatic awards, because they're a larger scale, we have a 2-step application process. So any team would be asked to submit an outline proposal, which would then be reviewed by the committee for shortlisting and then invited to a full application. And then that full application would then include an interview process as well. Right. Great, and next slide, please. So finally, just want to cover a few things in the last 10 minutes or so around what we're looking for at CRUK when we're bringing together people from the community to evaluate the proposals. So obviously, the evidence and the underlying data supporting a proposal, whether that's generated by the team submitting the proposal or from the literature, is important. A patient-facing approach is also, while not required for some, discovery work, we have always asked for any application to our committee to have a clear line of sight to patient or population benefit. So we want to see, even if you aren't going to be doing any translational or patient-facing work as part of the funding proposal that you're submitted, we want to see PIs thinking about what the outputs of their proposal would need to be in order to take that next translational step towards making impact in early detection. And we're not looking to fund biomarker research that's just going to continue to sit on a shelf. Obviously, if you are working with patients or tissue, the ethical or animals, the ethical considerations need to be clearly justified, and you need to be in the process of obtaining the correct approvals. And then in terms of the team, have you brought together the right expertise to help you deliver the proposal? And insofar as, have you consulted with clinicians who are on the front lines in terms of the detection and diagnosis pathways? Have you thought about where your technology or discovery would sit in the current clinical care pathways, and have you really spoken to the right people to bring together all of the expertise that you're going to need? Achievability in terms of what you're proposing, and obviously value for money. While we are continuing to fund research, COVID has significantly decreased our donations towards Cancer Research UK, and so we want to see good value for money in any submitted proposal. And novelty and exciting science is always something that gets the committee excited, and they're happy to see new ideas, things that are high risk and potentially high reward, things with potential. So next slide. So finally, I'm just going to whiz through these FAQs that we typically get about proposal submission, but please, we're definitely happy to take further questions after this if this doesn't answer one of your burning questions. So in terms of salaries, as you may be aware if you've applied for CRUK or other charity funding, before, we don't support PI salaries, but technicians or any named research staff, so postdocs and technicians can cost for salary. And if you're ever unsure, please just get in touch with the office and we can clarify that. In terms of international collaborations, we are very keen to support these in the early detection and diagnosis space. So again, we would be happy to support running costs for an international collaboration, but again, we couldn't support an international co-investigator's salary, and then as well, we don't pay overheads. So this sometimes can be a bit tricky with international collaborators, especially in the US. In terms of sample collection and biobanking, we would ideally like to see applications that are making use of existing resources if they are available. But obviously, if there aren't samples available for what you are proposing to do and you would like to include sample collection and biobanking as part of your application, that is acceptable. We just need to see evidence that you can't access those samples elsewhere. And for research nurses, which are obviously, again, in COVID times, a very hot commodity, even probably more so than they were before, you can cost for research nurse time, but what we would really like to see is applicants working with their local CTUs to kind of determine what capacity is available and ideally using research time through the CTU, but again, you can cost for research nurses. If you're looking to apply and it's larger than the suggested £500,000 for a project or 2.5 for a program, we would just encourage you to get in touch with the office and discuss this. We obviously, if the science demands certain costs, then we would be happy to accept an application that's larger than the cap. But again, we want to make sure that that is absolutely required. And the same thing for equipment. So you can cost for anything up to £50,000 on the application. Anything above that, again, would need to be a conversation with the office. If you have a new idea and you have limited preliminary data, we would really encourage you to consider the primer award, so the 1 year 100K award. And sometimes people have come to us with project level proposals without much data, and when it might have made more sense to come in as a primer. So again, it's best to have a conversation before you submit your application. The next question is, I think, a tricky one, and we do get lots of asking for advice around this one. So tumor recurrence, we do consider as within remit, so that would be the detection of tumor recurrence. However, detection of metastasis or monitoring of metastasis or anything to do with health outcomes around metastatic disease is not within remit. And finally, around patient involvement, this is costable within your application. PPI plans are not required, but they are encouraged, especially if you're working with patients or patient data or samples, and you can cost for patient involvement time. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. I will put a few more links into the chat. And obviously, if you want to be on our newsletter mailing list, this comes out every other month, and obviously has lots of information about all of the upcoming initiatives that Talicia and I have mentioned. Please do contact us at earlydetection@cancer.org.uk, and we'll add you to the newsletter. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that fantastic overview. I know that David has, I think, only about 15 minutes left. I think you have to leave by 2, so we will make sure we squeeze in a few Q&As before you leave, David. I don't think we have, I can't see any questions in the Q&A, so I hope that function is working okay for attendees. If it's not, please do raise a hand and we will ask your question. But I can see that we have a couple of questions from the panelists. So Chris Hurt has asked, and this may already have been answered actually, but he asked whether early detection of disease recurrence would be in remit.
Yeah, so as Alexis said, that is considered within remit for our committee.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Just scrolling through. So Reshma Rekoba, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, has asked, what is the extent of the link between CRUK and Our Future Health? Is CRUK funding Our Future Health, or are there plans to invest? It seems a good opportunity to link in. Our Future Health is also being discussed across the 4 nations in terms of levels of engagement. So I don't know who would like to try and address that one.
Yeah, so we're very good friends with Our Future Health. We've been engaged with the process of its conception and design since day one, really. And we're very strongly supportive of the need for such a resource. You know, you can't really find a company or academic working in this space who says they wouldn't like access to longitudinal pre-disease samples. So it's a real opportunity. We are not yet committed to funding it, but they haven't asked us to yet, actually. So where they're at now is they're working up their pilot recruitment phase. They are about to start that pilot in the coming month or so once they have HRA approval, which is in the works currently. And ourselves and a bunch of other charities are you know, considering how we can support that and what, you know, future engagement with them looks like. But yeah, absolutely, you know, it's an important thing. We're close to it and conversations are ongoing.
Thank you very much. Phil, I can see you've got your hand up, and then there's a couple more questions in the Q&A, which I'll come back to.
Thanks. Just a quick question about the biobank, because I lead on Cardiff University Biobank, which I'll talk about later on. It's interesting the comment about biosamples from biobanks if you can't get them elsewhere. I guess the approach we're taking in Cardiff is really trying to encourage researchers to use biobanks as a primary source of their material. And this is for a whole bunch of reasons. Because they're going to get good samples, because they're going to get linked data, because they're supported by good underpinning governance, because those samples aren't solely sat in that researcher's lab and they can be shared. So, and also for us, you don't have to apply for independent ethics. You come to our biobank to get approval. So I guess it's good to see that you will support biosamples from biobanks, because I think this is, I would say this obviously because I lead a biobank, this is the way forward, I feel, is to support our researchers to get the best samples at the appropriate time to do the best research.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. There is no sense in us paying for acquisition of new samples when existing ones are already there that can serve the same purpose. And exactly as you say, as long as the sample acquisition protocols are sort of standardized and the metadata is there and all the rest of it, like if you know what it is that you're getting, then absolutely we support the use of existing sample resources. I don't think I'm going to be around probably for your presentation later, but I'd love to hear at some point how, I guess, well accessed you feel your resource is, how visible it is. Are you linked into the kind of the UK CRC tissue repository directory thing?
Yes.
You know, is the infrastructure there and correct to make sure that you're maximizing the value of your samples?
Sorry, can I just add to that, David? It's Lee, by the way.
Hi.
Is there scope for capacity building here? Because my applications often involve a year or two of sample collecting before you can actually do anything. Is there scope to sort of just apply to build capacity in this area, to build the resources we have? So as the cancer researchers go to cancer banks, we have a bank we can go to rather than waste the time or money. But is that would have to come under a sort of a hypothesis-driven project where you'd need those samples rather than a capacity building exercise? Yeah.
So I guess the first question that you would always be asked is, do you need to collect those samples, or are there existing resources that can be used? If there's a clear argument that there are no such existing resources, we are absolutely happy to pay for sample acquisition and banking, and we will and do support the creation of new sample banks and and cohorts and things. Now the trick is we don't have a mechanism, or really see the need for a separate mechanism that is purely for creation of those kind of infrastructural resources. What we like to do is to support those as part of science. So it's fine to come in for a kind of a project or program grant that says, here's the science, this is what I want to do. In order to do that, I need to collect and store these kinds of samples, but while I'm at it, I might as well also be banking them and creating a resource for others to use.
Yeah, it's a really question on the time involved in these things, because obviously we're looking for the differences between normal and pre-malignant tissue, which is not as far removed as normal and cancer tissue. So we need access to normal tissue. This is for prevention as well as early detection work. And opportunities to collect those are difficult because people don't undergo procedures to collect normal tissue if they're healthy. So sometimes the time involved to collect this sort of suitable sample size can be quite long because you may be relying on opportunities. And that was more with the capacity building, that some projects may not be exactly feasible because you're never realistically going to be able to collect enough normal samples or from healthy people in a realistic time frame. It's just a point that interests me.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Perhaps that's a discussion for another time, but yeah, I can see the challenge, certainly.
Okay, so Arwen Gallagher has asked, will the EDD Discovery Science Leaning Programme grants be considered by the Discovery Science Committee or by a different committee with its own budget?
So I think this one is any discovery facing research that main goal is to understand either mechanisms or that would support earlier detection or discovery of early detection markers would all be within remit for our committee and not the Discovery Science Committee. If the main goal of the proposal is fundamental biology and understanding mechanism for mechanism's sake, then it would be within the remit of the Discovery Science Committee.
Thank you.
David, you're muted.
Do you want to come in here, Arwen?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to come in here, Arwen? Because I can see you had another question as well. So.
Oh no, sorry, that was part of the biobanking discussion. I'm writing the questions in the wrong order, sorry.
Anybody want to follow up on that point? No. Okay. So there's another question in the Q&A from Andrew Westwell, who asked, why is metastasis not in remit? Are there other CRUK funding schemes for this type of research?
I'm happy to go, David. I probably would just add that we don't consider metastatic disease to be early stage disease. And so while detection of metastasis is indeed detection, we wouldn't consider it early detection. And so that's why that wouldn't be within remit. I think whether it's in remit for other committees, potentially, depending on what the research question is, it could be if it was more clinical facing, it might be relevant for our clinical research committee. If it was more of a mechanistic understanding, it might be more relevant to our discovery science committee.
It all gets a little bit semantic. So if early detection of recurrence, is a really important clinical challenge and is important to CRUK and is in scope for the early detection committee. So you've got a small primary tumor that appears stage 1. You whip it out with surgery. Patient is clean, but they need some follow up, and so that early detection of relapse or recurrence in that patient is an early detection challenge. Now, what is it that you're subsequently detecting? So if you're looking for recurrence, and then what you find is distal to the original site, well, that was a MET essentially. That was a small MET at the time of original detection that you just didn't know was there. So it is a little bit semantic. The thrust of it is, just tell us what the idea is, tell us what you want to do, and we'll get it reviewed in the most appropriate way. I wouldn't overly fuss about which committee. The first question you want to ask yourselves and us is, what do I really want to know here? And if your question is genuinely, I'm interested in understanding, the biology of cancers and their sort of predisposition to metastasize, and how aggressive they're going to be, and how likely they are to have seeded elsewhere, and that's probably a fairly fundamental biology question, and so therefore you would take that to the science committee. Whereas if it's I'm interested in the sort of tech development that would help find those METs in the context of minimal residual disease post therapy, that's more of an early detection of recurrence question. But it's a continuum. It's not black and white. So have the conversation with us, basically.
Yeah, I think it highlights the importance of having that conversation at the earliest stage, isn't it, with you, to see whether an idea is in remit. Because I guess there are some overlaps between committees. I might just slip it. I can see, Sunil, you've got your hand up. I might slip a question in if that's okay. Because Alexis, you talked about, I think on one of your slides, you talked about understanding or changing public behaviour. And that made me think about, what the overlap is with your prevention and population health committee. That's probably quite a big question. I don't know whether you're able to kind of summarise the differences.
Again, I think preventative measures and behavior around, stop smoking, obesity, exercise, those things I think still fall within the prevention and population remit. Behavior around clinical presentation, and anything to do, I guess, with kind of potentially cancer fear, or fear of presentation, things that would be, I guess, putting up barriers, behaviors that would be putting up barriers to earlier detection and diagnosis, I think would be more relevant to our committee, to the early detection and diagnosis committee.
And I guess also the sort of acceptability of early detection and diagnosis technologies and approaches. So research sort of digging into that to find out what the preferences would be.
Thank you very much. Sunil, you have a question
It
there.
was similar actually with regard to the overlap between population and EDD. And if we've got actually new technology that is being embedded into, say, a population screening type of project, it's difficult to know because it really sits very well between both. And it's the ideal setting, you could argue, to actually translate those discovery or those biomarker type tests. So I don't know what the feeling is about that.
To David, because he has the strongest opinions about it.
I think the rule of thumb there, Sunil, is the strong likelihood is if you're doing something that is to do with early detection, you send it to the early detection committee. There are some things where, I don't know, if you're looking at risk stratification, let's say, there could be more of a grey area, because it could be, well, you know, I just want to understand the fundamental risk of cancer and its determinants, in which case it's more of a population health, more of a population science play. But also, actually, I could be using the same risk classifiers to say, here's a population at high risk of cancer, and therefore I want to do some screening in them, in which case it's more of an early detection play. And it's sort of the same science, but it depends how you want to use it. If you have got a technology or an approach that you think is going to detect cancers earlier, and you want to trial it in the NHS or in you know, pre-symptomatic screening type setting, the likelihood is that would sit with the early detection committee.
Again,
Thanks.
it's probably helpful to add that we all operate as, you know, one big early detection and prevention team. So again, it comes back to that point. If you're unsure, you can have a discussion with the team, and we'll liaise and work out where it's best placed, and help you with that.
And at that point, Kate et al., I'm terribly sorry, but I need to go off to a panel meeting. But thank you very much for inviting us, and I'll leave you into Lucia and Alexis's capable hands.
Thank you so much for joining, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that brings us up to just about 2 o'clock. Unless there are any, I can't see any more in the Q&As. Unless there are any other questions, I will thank Talicia and Alexis very much for presenting. You're very welcome to stay on if you have time. And thank you very much for your fantastic overviews, really, really clear and helpful. And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Lee Parry now, who's going to chair our whistle-stop tour through some overviews from some of our key partners who are doing cancer research in Wales. So over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, just for those who don't know me, my name's Lee Parry, so I'm sort of here today in the role as I'm the joint lead for enhanced diagnosis and personalised prevention at the Wales Cancer Research Centre. And that's led by our director, Dr. Sunil Dulwani, who conveniently is our next speaker as well. So we have a whistle-stop tour. I think I have 8 presentations to get us through in the next hour, so I'll be quite strict with time to get us through, but it's really about publicising the efforts that go on in Wales, allowing people to understand the network and there's different stakeholders. I mean, EDD research is certainly a multidisciplinary field. It needs engagement from all of us to strengthen applications. So a better awareness of what we're all doing should help to develop more applications in the future that come from Wales and beyond. And so, in fact, it was through an event like this I actually became aware of the early detection streams as well. And I'm a current CRUK early detection grant holder. So without further ado, I will get on with our first speaker. Is Dr. Sunil Dulwani. He's the QA lead for screening, the lead screening colonoscopist with Bowel Screen Wales. He's also our director for Healthwise Wales, and he's as I mentioned, the leader for prevention and enhanced detection for the Wales Cancer Research Centre. So thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Lee. I hope my slides have come up on screen. And I'm just going to go through very briefly about what we're doing from a Wales Cancer Research Centre perspective on what links and aligns with the CRUK early detection and diagnosis stream. Seems to be a slight issue here. Sorry, bear with me. So this is a schematic that many of you have seen before, and what we're focusing on is the bit on the left, which is prevention and diagnosis. And we've divided this into personalized prevention and enhanced diagnosis as being the key areas that we want to focus on based on our strengths and our ambition. I'm not going to talk further about the treatment and care domain today. And we've got a number of other cross-cutting themes, including biobanking, data integration, which Kevin will speak about, and patient and public involvement. And some of these strengths that we're talking about are our population cohorts, such as Healthwise Wales, and including the high-risk populations, and the strength that we have in linked healthcare data, longitudinal population follow-up, and our streams of research for involving therapeutic prevention, most clearly exemplified by our bowel cancer research, and behavior-based interventions in prevention, most well exemplified by our lung cancer research. The enhanced diagnosis part is divided into what we're doing around risk-based diagnosis, risk stratification mechanisms, adopting and evaluating novel technologies, right from the technologies involving genomics to artificial intelligence, imaging, and biomarker development and translation into practice. So it's too short a time to cover a lot of what we're doing in detail, but some examples of our personalized prevention are what we're doing to understand the impact of lifestyle and environment on bowel cancer. This is some of the work Lee's involved in, where we're looking at the preventive effects of dietary fiber and its interaction with gut bacteria, anti-cancer agents, and the basic mechanistic studies involving mutation to a healthy intestinal stem cell that's initiating the colorectal cancer. And part of this is about understanding the interactions between diet, gut bacteria, stem cells to identify where we could have interventions targeted to help people in this area. Enhanced diagnosis also includes developing tools that move from single cell to whole multi-cancer screening approaches, developing theranostic agents to simultaneously detect and treat cancer. And one of the projects that Lee referred to, using oncotrophic bacteria that only infect tumor tissue where they can be visualized, and using to stimulate a tumor immune response and deliver therapeutic agents at the same time. What you see in that little picture there is us also trying to see if we can make these bacteria fluoresce with colonoscope light, 450 nanometers. So it's truly interdisciplinary. And in colorectal cancer screening and early detection, we're trying to utilize the large data sets within cancer screening programs, primary and secondary care for evaluation of integrated AI and data linkage, which is a strength of ours, using different mathematical approaches to embed these into our studies. And below what you see is 3 of these studies: CONSCOP 2, which is a randomized controlled trial in this area in bowel cancer screening, and an embedded sub-study into it involving image AI, and a further study which is currently been submitted for genomic risk stratification as well. And this is about using our big public health cohorts and trial cohorts as risk stratification research platforms. Just moving on very quickly to the lung research side of things, this is what Kate's leading on, the Yorkshire Enhanced Stop Smoking study, where these are studies embedded within lung screening trials and pilots to assess the effect of adding a personalized smoking cessation intervention to lung cancer screening programs, and integrating this with what health practitioners are doing, how that screening might be delivered, and also looking at where the targeting of this approach needs to be for ex-smokers, current smokers, etc. Another very important study that we're really quite proud of that Kate's been leading on is the CAB study, or the Attitudes and Behavior to Cancer, which has had UKRI funding, and where we've been looking at population surveys and interviews to assess cancer attitudes and behavior linked to sale data. And this has recruited a really impressive number of adults very quickly in a very short space of time, targeting smokers, deprived, and ethnic minority populations that are otherwise not easy to reach. Again, an example of how well we integrate with our NHS colleagues is about optimizing cancer symptom awareness and what's being done in multidisciplinary rapid diagnostic centers, which we're trying to pilot out. And what you see there is all the efforts that are being made and how we feel this could link in to what we really aspire to do as part of embedding research within our NHS strategy. And it needless to say that this aligns really well to the roadmap from CRUK. As you can see in this theme, we're looking at longitudinal deep characterization of early cancer, precancerous lesions using routine patient touch points, flexible risk-adapted screening, as I've just explained from our research, and also novel AI risk stratification technologies and other new technology. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, Sana. I was just about to stop you anyway. Thank you. So without further ado, I'll move on to our next speaker. This is Professor Claire Wilkinson. She's a professor of general practice at Bangor University and also chairs the NIHR Primary Care Community Preventative Interventions Panel, and is also co-director of PRIME, the Wales Centre for Primary and Emergency Care Research here in Wales. So thank you, Claire.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
And see my slide?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. And thank you so much for all the speakers, to Kate and the CRUK team, and to Sunil, who's touched on some of the things already, which show that we are integrated, because I've actually got a slide I'm going to skip because Sunil already talked about it. I'm speaking on behalf of PRIME, which is the Wales Centre for Primary and Emergency, including unscheduled care research. This is an all-Wales centre between Cardiff, Bangor, University of South Wales and Swansea, with approximately 4.8 million in funding, and some more for COVID as well. And we do have a theme on screening, prevention and early diagnosis. Now I need to move on to slide 2, and this is not going to move. So let me just escape and go into PowerPoint, which is a trick if anybody else runs into that problem. Now it should move. Okay, so again, I'd like to relate our research briefly to the roadmap. It's a wonderful document. It reads a bit like science fiction to a long practicing GP, but absolutely wonderful, stimulating, fascinating, and will change what we do. We are very much going to need to be involved in terms of touch points with the NHS, with data linkage, and with the fact that we conduct over 90% of consultations in primary care. We also have a massive public interface with primary care in terms of education. I would put it to you that primary care are your operational end. We're your engine room. All the staff need to be educated, including the back office, if we're going to make progress with the roadmap. So this is a slide about PRIME, and I put this up just to point out that although you can see Work Package 7 in the green box on the right about screening, prevention and early diagnosis, the roadmap touches on all areas of this. So in the first theme, note that there's patient safety. Second theme, person-centered care, care close to communities. So we're very engaged with this roadmap concept all the way through this infrastructure funding. This third slide is a little bit like Sunil's slide where he showed the person walking along, except I want to draw your attention to the left-hand side to think about the intervals involved in the cancer journey and how it maps to the CRUK roadmap. And primary care is very involved in that left-hand side. So we have a lot of opportunities to address, for research that addresses Alexis's pink bubbles in her slide are very much concentrated there. This is the area where we might need to improve AI, machine learning, genomics, because we're so reliant on symptoms, but we may need to be more reliant on tests. Maybe multiple tests such as Grail or Pinpoint. These technologies are actually gallery tests that do a bunch of things at once and then try and discriminate in risk terms who might get what cancer. Now, those will need to be introduced early on in the left-hand side of this screen. So one of the big roles for primary care is going to be working out what the use point is and then assessing how well tests and biomarkers perform at that point. Now I'm going to touch on just a few more studies to show you how they map across to the roadmap as well from within our group. So the first one, again, Kate's work, Abacus 3, is about awareness and beliefs about cancer. And this is an outreach intervention, which many of you will be familiar with, to encourage more positive behaviors, because although everything in the roadmap is rational, we know perfectly well that as human beings, we're not very rational, and we want to run away and hide in a closet when people have cancer symptoms. So it's all about the hard to reach groups in particular and the underserved groups. And that's an area where we have particular expertise. This kind of work fits in with understanding risk and prognosis in theme 1. Action 2, use of NHS touch points, because going out to the community is also an NHS touch point. And action 1, which is about longitudinal studies and hard to reach groups. It also touches on theme 4, action 14, dynamic patient and public consultation about early diagnosis, because we know in Britain, the patients still are rather British about cancer and would rather not bother their doctors. That's something that we need to really deal with. move on to a study called TikTok. And at this point, I'd quite like to acknowledge Cancer Research Wales, who funded an awful lot of the research in our portfolio. This is a symptom awareness campaign in a socioeconomically deprived area of Wales that's really about getting folk towards the rapid diagnostic centres on the referral pathways. And we're going to need this at all sorts of junctures. So this kind of expertise will come into play in many studies that people might want to run. And here's where the primary care group and Prime more broadly have expertise in our teams that might be able to help you with things like this if you're trying to introduce something new. The COVID attitude and behavior study, that's already something that Sunil has touched on. And I would just point out that one of the major findings of that study was that half of those with cancer, you might have heard this in the press, half of those with cancer symptoms in the first lockdown delayed their appointments, delayed presenting to their GP. So that's major. It just goes to show how big the effect is at community level of various issues. The next one I'd like to touch on is the WICKED program. Again, this was funded by Cancer Research Wales to the tune of over 1 million. And this is a big program which has aimed at general practice teams and their back offices. So this is all about ensuring that GPs think cancer so that we have to find needles in haystacks. This is about widening the holes in the sieve that we use. We look for 3% risk increase over population risk to find who might have cancer according to symptoms and signs. That's a really hard job. Any addition from things that help us with that early diagnosis will be very useful. And we will use all the same techniques and interventions and behavioral approaches that we've developed in this program of work to do this. And we're currently running a trial and we're running it despite the pandemic, and the intervention is being applied online. It's going very well. So this also speaks to theme 2, actions 4 and 5, and theme 4, action 12, cancer site-specific ED&D delivery roadmaps, and action 13, a phased approach to optimizing ED&D paths. So having trotted through those, I'd just like to say that the challenges I see for our primary care community and the community in Prime altogether are these. We do have a huge role to play in this roadmap. I looked at the roadmap, just out of interest, I noted that primary care figured in the roadmap about 50 or 60 times. I think one of our big jobs is finding the use point of new technologies and enabling implementation. And we would need to work directly with partners in the broader groups to do such things. To work clinically at the primary secondary care interface. There's a lot in the roadmap about harmonizing IT across all systems. This is something we've been devoted to in this kind of primary care and population research for decades. And we do now do an awful lot of data linkage and longitudinal studies in primary care. We've got some fabulous resources. So if you want to talk to primary care about how we do things across the UK, there are some fantastic resources that probably most of you know about, but some might not. We really need to improve and remove any remaining barriers to open access to appropriate referrals and investigations at the primary care level, because a lot of this is not going to be coming in at secondary care level. This is going to start with a patient at home, perhaps, or at the primary care consultation, or within a screening program. So we need to put ourselves in a good position to have full participation as a research community in the UK-wide data linkage. And finally, in terms of the behavioral research program that needs to accompany the roadmap, we do need to think very carefully about acceptability, ethical considerations, and bring our skills in implementation science to bear. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I should just, I put it on the chat. We will do Q&As at the end of all the speakers, otherwise we'll probably run out of time if we did them individually. So my next speaker, I believe, is, I think it's Lisette. Yeah, it's Lisette you rather than, yeah, there she is.
Yes, it's me.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Lisette. Lisette is a senior trial manager in solid tumours at the Wales Cancer Trials Unit. So after you, off you go.
So let's hope this all works.
Started. Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint.
And I'm hoping I can do it as a PowerPoint now.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
so thanks very much for inviting us to speak. Chris has had to go, but I still left his name on here. So we both have quite different roles. I came from sort of a senior trial manager background, him from a statistician background. We end up that, you know, if we're running a trial, we need both of us. So we've worked a lot together, and obviously there's other statisticians and other trial managers within the CTR. I'm going to give quite a sort of an overview, because I realized that actually we've done a lot more secondary care than we have primary care, or sort of in early diagnosis. So for those of you who don't know much about the Centre for Trials Research, we've got 4 sort of themes or divisions, of which cancer is one of them. But then there's sort of various overlaps and interactions between the different groups. And cancer has sort of 45 of the 161 staff. So it's one of the bigger divisions. And then within that, we obviously have sort of branches out to vast numbers of other groups sort of across Cardiff and more nationally. So that's just to give you some idea of where we sort of fit. And we're a registered trials unit. So if we're running a trial, we provide very much sort of a package of running that trial. The cancer division is core funded by Cancer Research UK, and we're on sort of a 5-year cycle of funding, of which we're sort of just over halfway. So in that last application, we gave that we would have sort of 3 major themes and an emerging theme, of which the hematological malignancy, they've got the AML series of trials, which came with sort of HTCTU when they became part of CTR in its sort of existence. And then this year, eval has opened for AAL internationally. In fact, it's opened in France and not in the UK so far. They have a vast bioresource sort of already collected, and they're doing quite a lot of genomic analysis and translational papers that I suppose may identify things that could be used towards early diagnosis in the future. We've got the multimodality precision therapy trials, of which I think radiotherapy certainly is quite a big highlight, but covers a vast range of sort of different aspects towards sort of cancer treatments. I just wanted to pick a couple out because obviously time is short. Corinth is one, which is sort of a phase 1B. We're looking at, you know, if you give an immunotherapy and you give radiotherapy, do you stimulate sort of an abscopal effect? Do you stimulate the immune system? And really looking at that best point of which to give the immunotherapy in the radiotherapy sort of time scale. So somewhere at the end, somewhere further on. If you give it earlier, will you get more toxicity? So that's quite a sort of an early phase, but with sort of secondary care cancer patients. And the other I thought I'd highlight was Pathos, which I think of as the trial with everything in it. It's international, it has surgery, it has radiotherapy, it has chemotherapy, it doesn't actually have immunotherapy. It's got some video fluoroscopy, which is sort of for swallowing tests. We've been trying to do them potentially remotely because of COVID. It's got a translational collection. It's the pathology, it's got QA for pathology and radiotherapy, and they're looking at using digital imaging for the pathology. So it's, yeah, quite hectic. And then there's also the novel and contemporary methodology theme, which actually in reality overlaps an awful lot with the other 2 themes. So probably some of those trials I've listed could have gone in that box, but certainly developing that with regards to sort of some more umbrella platform trials, which the AML series tend to be, put more biomarkers or imaging in, add in routine data. Certainly quite a few of our trials will do some linkage with routine data, and then the various other collaborators across the UK. And then in our emerging theme, the main trial there is CONSCOP2 that Sunil has already discussed about. So I wasn't planning on saying much, as I figured he'd probably said it all already. And certainly if you're wondering about any of those particular trials, if you look at the CTR website, there's a summary of all of them on there. And picking something else that Claire said, you know, people are presenting later because our secondary care colleagues are saying, we're getting patients with more advanced disease. So COVID has definitely affected the presentations of those patients. So emerging diagnosis, CONSCOP2 I've mentioned, it's very much in that screening arena, but we're looking at imaging and hopefully some translational samples. TikTok, CABS and Abacus are all actually done by some of the other divisions within the CTR, which I suppose emphasizes that there is this, nothing fits in a box as such. And then I've just sort of given some areas of development. We're obviously keen to expand the early diagnosis. And so we thought it could be screening or potentials, preventative therapies, certainly looking at maybe HPV vaccination. There was some work with RT-Vin, behavioural changes. I think there's a prehabilitation grant going in or gone in. The idea of platform studies where you may look at across lots of studies, like if it's a Grail test that Claire was mentioning, could you do it across different things, or could you look at a drug across a lot of different cancers? Chris's earlier question about whether the committee would cover recurrence is certainly a cytosponge, thinking of it's basically a piece of sponge on the end of a piece of string, but will that pick up signs of cancer, you know, so you can make people swallow this at a regular interval, pull it out, put it in a pot, and are there any cancer cells, rather than them having to go through an endoscopy. So he's been working on that. And then there's also the insemination and the public engagement, and very much that awareness of cancer and earlier diagnosis is ultimately less treatment. And I just wanted to mention we have quite a few samples biobanked from various studies, and certainly during the project life cycle we would have plans for that analysis, but at the end we quite often do actually use the biobank, so there may be some samples for cancer patients in that biobank already. We're open for people to apply to use it.
Hi, Lizette. Are you nearly there? I just held my little axe up.
Oh, I was just about looking for the get out of my screen sharing button.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. Yeah, I should probably emphasize that. I mean, the cancer trials, they are opening up some of their collections for research for the samples. So that's something that the Wales Cancer Research Centre held a webinar on recently. So next up, we have Professor Phil Stevens. He's, as he's already mentioned, he's the academic lead for the Cardiff University Biobank, and he's also the Cardiff University's Dean for International Engagement. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Lee. So a quick whistle-stop tour through the Cardiff University Biobank, and then I'm going to pose some questions at the end, some of which I think we've more or less covered, but we can pick up on them later on in the general Q&A. So first of all, what is Cardiff University Biobank? Well, it's a multi-million-pound, quite recent investment. It opened in 2018 from Cardiff University, but specifically working in relationship with certain partners. And a very important partner for us is obviously Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, because we share some site and some facilities. So we've got storage space for nearly 1 million biological samples. I hope we never get to 1 million biological samples, because if we do, it means we're not getting them out the door for research. So we failed in what we've been trying to do. In terms of why we were set up initially, it was really to try and provide the underpinning infrastructure support and harmonise governance for some of the existing tissue banks within the university, to offer them some longer term sustainability. You know, biobanking is not necessarily the most cost effective in terms of activities. So what we're trying to do with this centralised facility is try and support those biobanks going forward. And of course, we have a cost recovery system, which I can talk a bit about later if needed. We're ISO 9001 accredited, but we're also interested in new collections, not just existing tissue banks, but new collections. So clinicians or researchers come to us and ask us to get access to tissue, and we can do that, and we can do it in a very easy way for them, providing them with access to materials in a very short space of time. We're also interested in long-term storage, longitudinal studies, and I'll come on to that. We've actually been involved in some COVID studies as well, which have been very interesting. But critical to what we do really is also about our collaborations. We've got collaborative discussions ongoing with Welsh Blood Service at the minute about access to blood and blood products. We heavily supported Public Health Wales during the COVID pandemic, storing samples for them. And so we've got a developing relationship with them around access to samples. And we've had some discussions with Welsh Government around all Wales biobanking, which I'll come on to the next slide. So this is my version of Sunil's people walking across the screen. This is tissue samples going across the screen. And really, this is about longitudinal life course sampling. This is what we really want to do. We're not interested just in disease. We're interested in pre-disease, diagnostic, but also healthy pre-morbid samples if we can get access to them. And what I'd love to see, maybe before I can retire at some stage, is to see this in process so we can get the complete journey of tissue samples through someone's life course. And the important thing about this is that you can start to connect diseases. At the moment, lots of the tissue banks, lots of collections are disease specific, but what we'd like to do is try and connect those up. And so you can see at the bottom of the screen here, this is the individual tissue banks that we work with, AML, Archie Cochrane, the Tooth Bank, they're all integrated already, but we're now working with the other tissue banks to help integrate them and support them. And I guess the main one that we need to talk about today is Wales Cancer Bank. We have a really good relationship with Wales Cancer Bank, really want to support them going forward as their funding starts to reach its completion. But importantly, what we offer within the biobank is that we're not linked to a particular disease. We can collect any disease that we want. And that's really, really important going forward. And so what we want to do is work with other collections across Wales, but having this discussion now, this wider discussion with the Welsh Government about how we can integrate all this. For me, biosamples are really, really important, but if you can get that data attached to them, that clinical data, but also the outcome data, the genomics data, the screening data, then that makes them a really, really important resource. And so we're having those discussions. I see Kevin's talking a bit later on, so I'm sure he'll talk about the data linkage. So what we're trying to do is not just collect biosamples, but link it to data across the life course of an individual. And so just as a final slide and some discussion points, you know, is there a general interest in collection of normal and pre-malignant tissues? We did discuss it earlier on, but can we use that to supplement existing cancer collections? Can we start this locally? Can we start at a local level, or maybe a few different biobanks, but with an aim to develop it nationally? Is there an interest in building up tissue collections which are not immediately driven by research? We do have collections driven by research, but we also have collections which are collected prospectively, one around cystic fibrosis, for example, which is proving to be really useful. What types of access costing structure is preferable? We've got different ways in which we can allow individuals to bank samples and access them. And then finally, what funding routes are available? And we've heard a little bit about this already. So there's just some questions. I'll leave those there and we can talk about them later on. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Phil.
I think I'll probably ask the question later, how do we achieve Phil's dream as well? So that's a question to everybody to ponder. So next we have Professor Jane Hopkinson. She is the Professor of Nursing and Interdisciplinary Cancer Care for Lindra and within Cardiff University. She's also the lead for nursing and allied healthcare professionals on the Wales Cancer Research Centre leadership team. And Jane, I think there you are, slides up, ready to go. Thanks, Jane.
Excellent. So thank you, Lee. Lee's asked me to say a few words about cancer care research at Cardiff University. I lead the cancer care research group in healthcare sciences. I'm a nurse and palliative care nurse by background. And what I want to do first is just introduce you to my research group. Here they are. Our purpose is to do research that looks at self-management and decision support for people in treatment and beyond treatment in survivorship. The idea being to prevent problems and reduce risk of problems. So we've got a number of people who are doing both doctoral and postdoctoral work. I'm going to introduce you to just three of them this afternoon. The first person here is Judith Santos. She's looking at cancer rehabilitation services across South Wales, and she's about to submit her PhD thesis. Second person here is Abdi Ali. He's looking at psychosocial factors that influence adherence to oral chemotherapy. Abdi's got European money. He's got a CES 2 studentship, and he'll be submitting his thesis in the summertime in July. And then the third person here is one of our postdocs, is Nicola Gale, and Nicola is studying home-based activity for people with lung cancer. She's a lecturer in physiotherapy, and she's got RCBC funding for her research. So there's some of our research leaders of the future. Now let's take a quick look at some of our programmatic work. We've got a number of programs in progress. I'm going to talk about just 3 this afternoon, very briefly. First of all, since 2013, we've had work going on around comorbid cancer and dementia. So people with a dementia diagnosis that then go on to have cancer treatment. We're now at the stage where memory mates and innovation in cancer care is being implemented at the Cancer Centre, Velindre Cancer Centre, and we have an evaluation project in progress. Second example, Tessa Watts is leading work around supportive care in immunotherapy. And third example this afternoon, the RECAN project. So this is a European-wide project. We have Professor Danny Kelly, who's worked with the European Oncology Nursing Society for some years now, and he's a co-applicant on this piece of work, looking at the provision of cancer nursing across Europe, with particular attention to inequality and how we can address inequality in the provision of cancer nursing services. Moving swiftly on in the interest of time, I want to say just a few words about our partnership working with our local NHS, in particular our strong partnership with the Velindre Cancer Centre. Velindre support half of my post. I spend 2.5 days a week working alongside Velindre staff, building nurse and allied health professional research capacity. The idea being that we're developing a program of research that can support safe and compassionate care for patients with comorbidity or complex needs, and of course their families. We're also working collaboratively with peers across Wales. So we've got leadership roles in the Cancer Nurse and Allied Health Professional Research Network. So this is a Pan-Wales network that has an annual meeting, and we've just established regional groups with our first regional meeting happening in South West Wales in June later this year. So that's quite an exciting development for us. And then my last slide just shows you our international reach. So we have collaborative work going on across the world. I've listed here just 4 recent publications that demonstrate some of the success and productivity of our collaborative work with people from other countries across the world. I'll hand you back to Lee now. Thanks, Lee. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jane. That's such an important area of work. I think we had a conversation once where you reminded me that when you first trained, living with cancer wasn't really an issue, and how it's such a major issue now, and we really seem to be leading the world in some of these efforts. So thanks for that, Jane. I just pass over now to Dr. Kevin Ashford, and the context of this talk, amongst everyone's many titles, Kevin is the Data Strategy and IT Infrastructure Lead for the Wales Gene Park. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Lee. So yes, so I'm talking about data integration. I'm from Wales Gene Park, but I'm working quite closely with Wales Cancer Research Centre. Sunil earlier referred to the cross-cutting data integration theme, and that's basically what I'm going to be talking about now. So what we're talking about is data collected and it needs to be converted into patient benefit. How do we achieve that? I mean, that's essentially what the data strategy is about. And it's essentially focusing in on a range of enablers that we need to be developing. One of those, obviously, is the technology. The technology allows us to integrate and share and link data. But also we need to be dealing with data at scale. So we need to have a strategy that copes with that. We need, obviously, to link that data, as Phil alluded to earlier, and indeed many others. We need to access that data, and a corollary to that is we need security and information governance to protect that data. We need to generate resources that the public can trust. We need to be collaborating. There are a number of data controllers that need to be working together in order to integrate data. Most importantly, we need the expertise to support all of this. And so that's what we're trying to do. I'm going to focus on a couple of areas that allow us to be achieving that. Firstly, I'm going to focus on the IT that we're currently developing with partners, in particular the NHS. And so this work focuses in on some of those enabler areas I referred to. And so we're currently building infrastructure in Cardiff University with CRUK or Hawk. And that's effectively, I won't go into detail what that technology is, but basically it's high performance compute, which we're building to be AI ready. And what we mean by that is that it has the right technology and the right infrastructure to support future AI applications. We've been talking a lot, a number of instances, people have been referring to AI. We need to be ready for that. And part of being AI ready is the FAIR principles. Findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. These are the principles that we need to be using to build our infrastructure. And coming on to the issue of access, we need to build infrastructure with security in mind and with information governance in mind. So for example, we need to build infrastructure that is ISO 27001 compatible. It has Cyber Essential Plus certification and so on. In other words, building a resource that is trustworthy, that partners can trust and indeed the public can trust. And it also has to be an infrastructure that can empower researchers. And then we come to collaboration. The IT we're building at the moment is a collaboration with the NHS and obviously academia, but also industry. We're getting funds through Wales Cancer Bank to enhance this infrastructure, to make it, to provide GPU processors for future AI work. So this is one area in which we're working on in order to focus in on those enablers. The other area is we are focusing on specific projects, case studies that demonstrate, elucidate, exemplify the sort of things we're going to need in future in terms of data integration. So this is an incremental approach. We focus in on particular projects which will allow us to develop our data linkage, collaboration and scale enablers. And so again, FAIR principles come in. Curation is an important factor here. And so choosing projects that allow us to develop our curation capability is important. Collaboration is important in terms of the sort of partners that we need to be working with. And SAIL is clearly a very important partner from Swansea, as indeed is NDR, the National Data Resource from NHS Wales. And HDR UK is incredibly important, of which Data Can, the cancer data hub within HDR UK, are clearly important partners that we have to be working with. So we're developing projects that enable that sort of interaction. And of course, we're focusing in on the sort of data that we need to be, the clinical data, the genomic data, imaging data, the sort of large scale data sets. So that's my final slide, is just to really emphasize the final point. To achieve all of that, to focus in on those enablers, we have to be developing expertise. And so one of the things we're doing is we're trying to attract further funds to get that expertise that allow us to get those research software engineers to handle the scale of data we're talking about, to get those databasing experts so we can link that data, to get those experts who are needed for the standards and web protocols and so on, so that allow us to share data with partners. We need expertise with familiarity with data security and governance. And of course, we need the data engineers to build the IT. So that's all I wanted to really say. I'm just basically emphasize the fact that our data strategy involves focusing in on these various enablers. And I mentioned case studies, and I mentioned those are ways in which we can explore and develop our resources. If anybody has case studies that they think could be of value here, please talk to me about how we can be using case studies to develop our IT in a shared capacity. And there, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Your field really is the king of acronyms, isn't it? So we'll move on swiftly to Arwen Gallimore. We are due to finish at 3, so I'm very aware of that. And we will have Q&As at the end, but people, please hang around if you can, if we run over. Thanks, Arwen.
Thanks very much, Lee. So yes, I'm Arwen Gallimore. I'm the cancer theme lead across the College of Life Sciences at Cardiff. And the aim of this role really is to promote a kind of unified, cancer research strategy across the university, and to make sure, that as a community of researchers, we make the most of our strengths and assets, not just within the university, but also with the partners, some of which you can see on my screen here. And I think it's fair to say, from what you've heard already, that we have a lot to offer to the proposed roadmap, including expertise, in genomics and components of what you've already heard, like in the early detection and diagnosis, health behaviours arena, and also the opportunities that that Kevin has talked about in data integration and artificial intelligence. As you can see, from my slide here, another major area of cancer research focus in Cardiff is immunology and immunotherapy, and we've almost finished preparing an expression of interest in this area for a Cancer Research UK centre bid, and that draws then in the expertise from genomics, from the early detection and diagnosis components as well. And so relevant today, really, what we want to do is to be able to ask sort of novel and important questions in the arena of early diagnosis and detection, drawing in the strengths then from all of these other areas, and target then the funding schemes that Alexis and Talicia outlined today. I think there are some sort of real opportunities there for us here in Cardiff. So I've only got a few minutes. I know we're running out of time, so it doesn't make any sense really to talk about any of these areas in detail. But again, I've also, like several of our other speakers, have just popped some sort of questions up there. These are the sorts of things that I think are very important, for us all to sort of shape our sort of discussions and thoughts going forward. The first question really is about discovery science and how its place on the roadmap is envisaged. And I think, the things that yourselves, Talicia and Alexis, told us today have already, been very, very useful in informing us in this area. I've got immunology written there in brackets. I mean, I am an immunologist, and I was very aware when I was reading the roadmap that the immune system wasn't mentioned in it at all. And I don't want to be too immunocentric, but I think it is the case that when we think about cancer immunology and immunotherapy, I think this is often synonymous, with very sort of expensive, toxic approaches that are used to treat advanced disease. But actually, there's a whole other area of immunology, and that is cancer immune surveillance. That's about understanding how the immune system prevents cancer in the first place. And this is a very poorly understood area, but it's an area where I think that we can make quite a significant contribution here in Cardiff. And, this is interesting because what we're seeing now with COVID is a huge increase in the development of pretty sophisticated and quite sort of rapid point of care tests for immune responses. Do you make antibodies to SARS-CoV-2? Can you make a T-cell response? And we can now develop kits that allow you to measure these things, in a GP surgery. So why not, find out what are the calling cards for early cancer development? This is an area which I think is very, very untapped, and something that would be interesting to have some conversations about. We also have enormous expertise here in developing novel vaccine vectors. And vaccination is another area which could fit under this remit, when you think about high-risk individuals. If you identify these individuals, are they individuals who could be offered an effective vaccine, or could it be offered as a part of a strategy to prevent disease recurrence? So I think lots to talk about in that area, and of course, many others. The other questions I have, I think Claire Wilkinson, you know, I thought your last slide summed these things up. How do we ensure a coherent and joined up approach in practice? You know, the roadmap talks a lot about solving the problems of a fragmented approach. And I think this is the key thing, isn't it? How do we actually in practice get around these problems and find out how we can most, you know, effectively contribute to this? And then the third thing, really, I think it's for CRUK. I think, you know, Talicia and Alexis, you're still here. I don't know if there have been any discussions about, you know, how perhaps these sorts of approaches very much require big changes to the workforce. You know, you're talking about screening large numbers of people, you know, population wide. What does this mean in terms of, you know, organizing and training, I guess, a clinical workforce? It's a massive question, but also I think for the academic workforce, you know, these are long-term projects. The sort of stuff Kevin was just talking about, these require a great deal of investment of time and expertise. And is the sort of short-term funding sort of model that we have at the moment, 3 to 5 years funding, is it the most appropriate, you know, to try to match this scale of ambition? So, you know, that's the question I'd sort of like to put out there. So that's all from me, really, Lee. It's you know, I just wanted to put some thoughts forward there to perhaps to shape the questions and answers.
Oh, great. Thanks, Alwyn. And my apologies for not introducing you properly as well. I probably naively assumed everyone knows you. So I've just been told that our last speaker will be brief. I realise we're now nearly at 10 to. Our final speaker is Dr. Liba Shiran, and she is the lead for healthcare science and population research at Cardiff University. So over to you, Liba. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I shall be very brief. So population health research team, I'm basically an equivalent of Arwin, who just presented leading on the College of Biomedical and Life Sciences population health. But yeah, it's another research team. This is our research team where, you know, Kate is actually an associate lead with myself. I'm the lead, and also we've got a couple of other academics from the Division of Population Medicine as well as School of Healthcare Sciences. In terms of our mission, I mean, our aim is really to prevent ill health, reduce health inequalities, and improve health across the life course by understanding biological and as well as a range of other factors such as psychosocial factors and causes of disease and determinants of health risk behaviors. And I guess, you know, listening to all your presenters, I think this is a very important part of this. You know, early detection and diagnosis in cancer is going to be requiring interventions that actually speak to people on a population health and public health level. So this is where we would potentially link up. We also have academics and researchers with expertise in designing and developing and testing interventions to improve health and healthcare quality and safety, as well as then crucially translating and implementing evidence into practice through innovation. So again, ideally linked up with you know, all what has been said before. I'm not going to go through our sub-themes, but they are all linked more or less through to health behaviors and behavior change. Again, particularly important if we are trying to look for screening methods or surveillance methods to detect cancer early. And in terms of our role, we bring people together across different disciplines and build groups for larger grants. So again, something that, you know, our role would be very much trying to mediate this, you know, building groups together to allow people go for larger grants. We also showcase and maximize the benefits of the existing infrastructure related to population health. Many of our partners have actually presented today. So, you know, it sort of ideally links with us as a sort of being a mediating hub, if you like. We also tend to signpost groups to infrastructures and our key partnerships, as well as try to develop and support early career researchers in order to look after the sort of future and succession planning. In terms of this particular cancer early detection and diagnosis grant funding, I guess the outputs will likely require population level engagement, screening and surveillance. And I'm sure that myself and Arwin and all the rest of the theme leads are going to work, very hard to try to link up and create groups in order to realize the sort of research benefit of all of the outputs that that this type of research will eventually lead to. And we would be at the sort of, the end of how to actually bring this to the people effectively. So people tend to engage with this type of things. It doesn't matter how good the science is if the way how we implement this is not speaking to the people at the business end, really. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Eva, that was great. So that was the final presentation. I'd just like to thank all the speakers. I think we did a pretty good job with that number of speakers to finish nearly on time. So thanks for that. I hope it's apparent to everyone listening that I think we've covered everything from health behaviours to primary care, secondary care, clinical, and everything else that we do here in Wales. So I think what's important is we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to get together a bit more. So via the Wales Cancer Research Centre and any other enterprises, I think the intention is to get us together at another stage to discuss how we all link up better to achieve Phil's dream and everyone else's dream and answer those questions that we had posed by all those speakers there. So we have a few questions. I just want to make use of this time, so I will probably go to, so Talicia, you offer to answer the points in Arwen's questions.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for that point, Arwen. So I think that I've put this in the chat, and Alexis has highlighted it too, that the need for increased capacity is a key priority for our policy team at Cancer Research UK, and it also forms one of the policy recommendations within the roadmap, because we appreciate that in order to back up this ambitious vision, we need that workforce, we need that infrastructure to deliver it. So that's one factor. You also mentioned the academic side, and we do appreciate that the things that we're calling for in the roadmap are incredibly ambitious, and some of them are quite long-term research goals. One key thing about the roadmap is obviously it's not a Cancer Research UK strategy, it's a strategy for the whole ecosystem, but obviously we want to be driving forward some of these recommendations, and we will be well placed to do that. So we're currently having a look at those recommendations and thinking about the ones that will be driving forward, and we're definitely considering that. So we're considering the fact that what we're calling for is probably a huge shift in the research community as it is at the moment, and thinking about how we get there. And maybe in some cases that means having a sort of a tiered response in terms of sort of building up funding over a period of time, partnering with other organisations to bring in their community and their funding. So it's definitely something that's on our radar and we're trying to think about.
Thanks, Felicia, for that. There's also a question.
Can I
sorry,
quickly add? Sorry, I just wanted to jump in and add one other point of kind of about the academic landscape, and especially for early career researchers who might be interested in early detection and diagnosis as a kind of a field. We're trying to support them as much as we can, with early stage funding. So the Primer Award, as I mentioned, is open to postdocs. We're also working closely with our careers team at CRUK. So this is the team that looks after all of our career development fellowships, and early detection and diagnosis should also be a priority in the fellowships that we are funding. So if that is if you know of someone who wants to kind of get into this track and they're facing difficulties in terms of securing funding or even setting up their group, please put them in touch with us and we'll help them liaise with the careers team to talk about funding opportunities in that way.
Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, that's a fantastic opportunity for postdocs. I would have loved that when I was a postdoc. I think we have a question which is on the Q&A, and this is from Tom Crosby, and Claire Wilkinson has offered to answer this live. And the question is there a UK position on primary care research learning service improvement time? For secondary care, this can account for 10 to 30% of the job, but does this exist for primary care?
Yes, it does, and it exists. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Claire.
Okay. It does exist, yes, Tom. Learning and quality improvement time is core to primary care. This job structures aren't quite the same. For us, it's embedded in annual appraisals, and a chunk of what we do has to be aimed at service improvement and quality improvement. And then we do really big projects for the revalidation part of our role at the 5-year point. So there's an awful lot of work that goes on at that level. So that's the individual level and the practice level. But then you've also got cluster level initiatives, health board level initiatives for primary care, and Wales level initiatives. So it does exist routinely. It's just in a different form than you're used to in secondary care. We don't have job plans. I would say, look how well and how agile primary care has been at taking on COVID vaccination and changes to primary care practice during the pandemic, where we switched up over 50% of the consultations to be online and managed to achieve that through existing mechanisms. So we are pretty agile. And I wanted to also mention the CPRD, which is got 60 million patients on it. This is the clinical practice research database, 60 million patients, and that's linked. If you look it up online, you'll find that it's linked to about 20 different data sets, including all of HES, all the cancer registry, etc. So we have some massive resources to offer as well in primary care.
Great, thanks, Claire. I should probably wrap it up there. Apologies for not having much time for too many questions, but I think I've left, I'll hand back to Kate now, and I've left her 2 minutes to summarise and close this meeting. Thanks, Kate.
I think that's superb timing, actually. Thank you very much to Lee and to all of our speakers today. It's been absolutely brilliant to hear about, well, firstly to hear about CRUK's research priorities, but also to hear about the the breadth and the infrastructure that we do have in Wales for cancer research in this area. So, it was also great, Alexis, that you highlighted opportunities for early career researchers, because obviously what we also want to do is to support the next and bring up the next generation. So huge thanks to everybody. I also want to thank Lee and Jodie Bond, who has been, well, Jodie has been working hugely in the background to support the meeting today. So thank you to her for all her support. And just very briefly, just to wrap up in terms of next steps, what we would like to do is to compile a very brief summary report of today's workshop that we will share with you. So bear with us while we get that ready. And it's coming up to 3 o'clock. So once again, huge thanks to everybody, to the audience for participating, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks so much for having us. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.